really thrilled to be here and enjoyed yesterday thoroughly. I have a gut feeling though that today might be even a little bit more enjoyable, at least for me. So what I'm talking about here is work that has been done in the framework of a floating film consortia. So let me start by giving you a very narrow, very focused view of one aspect of that consortium, which is that it wants to, it's working to reveal a nuclear structure with a set of different aims. There have been deliverables defined from the very beginning, among those community standards and metrics, which is quite common for NIH common projects. And one of the questions that immediately from the very beginning was prevalent in the discussion is how do we fuse imaging data and sequencing data? So how do we combine the genomics of the imaging? How does that work? And it raised a question for me right away, which was like, wait, we have trouble comparing images. How do we now provide data to bioinformaticians that they can model in their genomics data? And how do we provide some sort of a quality measurement for that? How do we make this not a big artifact because the differences in measurements of what is a surface and what is a particle are so massive? Well, that's a question that many different folks has kept me busy for the last 25 years, and now I finally have a chance, right? Sorry, that was too fast. There is a difference between these fields, the genomics and the imaging. And so if you ask for reasons why comparing images is a problem, you can go down a road of a lot of technical reasons and specifications, but there is the ENCODE project that the genomics people had started 15 years ago has been running strong. And in their first cycles, more than 10 years ago, that community was able to settle for a common quality control mechanism and for metadata. And that's something that's missing in the imaging community. Well, it's missing for very good reasons, but the question is, does it have to stay? So if we talk metadata, then we obviously talk about a lot of different things that need to be described. From the biosource through the handling, the culturing, the modifications, the sort of experiment, to eventually the imaging and the data analysis. And while I want to focus on the imaging today, I want to mention that we can do so because we have a handle on the other parts. We have a handle on how to document biosources and origins. We have ontologies that describe those problems. We have implementations from ENCODE, from the 40 nucleum, from EMBL, from even OMI in some form. So there is structure there. And that structure is missing for imaging. So when I talk imaging metadata then, what happens here? Well, on the one hand, we have the data, the images, and we need to describe them. I want to introduce three principal groups here. Starting with what we call microscope specifications and settings, where it's really about what are the parts, how are they put together, what are the settings under which they are used, and how are these metadata reported. This is what should principally be in the header of an image data file, and bioformats is the platform where we read this currently, but it's never complete and it varies widely. So I have taken the liberty of taking a picture from printouts of metadata headers. And what becomes very clear is, for the same machine, you get different amounts of metadata depending on where you are. An area scan at EMBL will report on the voltages of certain servo motors, while the same area scan in a different institution will by far not. And so it goes on. The second part is optical calibration. Now, optical calibration is basically, what is my alignment? How good are the channels aligned? Is the PSF okay? Do I work resolution limited? All those questions. We have a good handle on there. We have a lot of very good standards. They are expensive, but they exist. We have beads, we know how to do that. And then there is what I refer to as light calibration. And that's the one that is most often overlooked. And there we really talk about how much light is coming into the microscope, how much of that does reach the sample, and how much do we collect. And if we wanted to measure the light that we collect, we need a unit. The unit would be photons. To convert data of intensity units that are arbitrary back into photons, we need to know the detector gain. That's something in the physics community is very usual. Nobody would actually try to run an experiment without it, but it's not something that we do in the biomedical or bioinformatics community because it is time-consuming and it demands a high degree of expert knowledge. What optical calibration and light calibration have in common is they are rarely reported. If you look at papers, there's no such information there. So if I go in a public database and I want to load an image data set from somebody else, I have trouble to even do major basic analysis because I don't know how red and green relate to each other. Okay. For the purpose of today, because it's a short presentation, we skip optical calibration. But what these slides before might have shown you is we look at a lot of work in documentation here. And that can drive you crazy. And I think Jan was one of the first people for the end who very strongly voiced that we are crazy if we really want to go down this road. And so our response to that was, well, let's acknowledge that not every experiment has the same intent. It makes absolute sense to say there are experiments like counting nuclei that we can analyze the data with very little metadata. We don't need to know much. And there are other data like single molecule life cell tracking and doing 3D mobility analysis where we will need to know a lot. And then there is all the developers that build fantastically new systems all the time and don't tell us anything about them. So the outcome was a tier system. And this tier system and the way it's put together is very specific for the 40N. And so these are examples that fit that sort of work well. But the idea of a tier, the idea to say, well, there are easier and more complex applications and your reporting duty should be scaled with that sort of interpretation and aim makes sense and it's transferable. And it's something that I hope can be easily adopted to other communities. So metadata. We weren't starting at zero. Well, the 40N was starting at zero because we worked off the ENCODE system. There was basically nothing about imaging, but Jason has done a lot of work there for a long time. And so we looked at this system, we asked ourselves, well, we made a long list, a couple of 70 or 100 values, but we need to know to actually interpret a live cell imaging system. And could we fit it in here? And when we said no, but there's also data in here that I don't need for an easy experiment. So we went ahead and Jason heard of this list at some sort of weird online meeting we had. And I was like, you guys need to work this out. Okay, so here we go. What they call the imaging instrumental called specification. Eventually we'll come back to imaging here. But this is basically in blue what was there, and then in green and other colors what we've added in terms of fields to describe an instrument. Now that doesn't look too bad, so we went ahead and looked at the other thing, which is the image, right? How are the channels recorded and so on information. And again we had a feeling, well, there are a couple of things we would need to add to get to today's level of complexity in imaging. Showing only the headers, this is not too bad, but then if I blow this up and show you all the different values that are in there, it becomes pretty scary. I mean, this is formulated as a data model, and Patronus from did a lot of work here. But if I show this to any user, expert or not, it becomes, what the heck are you talking about? And so, while we have put out the manuscript on this in the first version of bioRxiv, and hopefully the DOI is signed pretty soon, we went on and said, well, in principle what we need is a graphical interface. And so this is a prototype that we did. This prototype works in Numero, it works in a web page, it can read bioformats, so it imports anything that is in your data file already. And when you create a microscope and you say, I create this microscope at this tier level, I will only show you the parts and the values for those parts that are relevant for a tier level. So you don't see the rest. Well, you can save it and open it at a lower tier, or you can open it at a higher tier. If you do so, it will tell you what is missing. In that way, we can create a record of your microscope, and we're currently testing this within the consortium with a couple of labs, where you ask them, can you give us your microscope? The settings that can be documented in this just as well. Well, let me change gears here for a moment then. As I said, skipping the optical calibration, here we come to light. There is two real assumptions that I need to spell out. The first is this: we are working with photons. We're putting photons in the system and we're getting photons out of the system. And at that level, we should be able to count. If that is true, then there is another little curiosity. A lot of methods that are used in imaging is so problematic because the heterogeneity in methods is really huge, right? We go from simple wide field systems through confocals to photons to super resolution. But other than STAT, most of these methods record a raw data image that is diffraction limited, and then process these images with the additional information, like that is a distortion, or that is a time information, but it extracts a process. So at the level of raw data, if we know how many photons are under a PSF or how many photons are in a structure, what the noise characteristic of that image is in photons, how that statistically behaves, we can make general statements about the information content of these images. And that gives us a first gauge on, is it realistic that that data set that has basically less photons in the signal than that other data set gets 10 times its resolution? What we would need for that are noise models to translate the intensity units on our detectors back into photons. And thankfully, that has been solved. They do exist. So why don't we use them? Well, because it's expensive. You need power meters, you need light sources, you need people who know how to build the little contraptions, you need to align your microscope. So you need to call your service tech. That becomes a problem here. Right? So, and we, Warren Zipfel and I came to the first annual meeting for the EPO with an Excel table saying, hey, basically, if you do all these things, you're good. Right? A couple of students took that and learned how to do it and were very happy, but it doesn't work. Right? It's not realistic. Just like the imaging standards, it's very unrealistic to ask labs to just please buy a $5,000 standard and record its images. So we need something that would actually look like this. It needs to be easy, fit ideally in the position of an objective so that we can bypass the high NA problems. Measure light that comes in, and generate light that goes out. And this light needs to have a couple of properties. And then at the end of it, it should ideally work without the user and be pretty cheap. So how do you do that? Like I said, my lab has a background in building super machines. So we said, well, maybe we can. And so we started with the first prototype to show that we can combine a light source with a power meter. Light sources have been used for calibration before. Like Warren Zipfel uses the Ward Weapons part. Ted Young and Delph 50 years ago showed us that this is how it goes. But we just combine these two things and it's reasonable again. We built an improved version, we used in a field test, a couple of labs and imaging facilities, and are now assembling a third version, which has the parameters we're really looking for. It fits pretty much into any objective place. It's a little wider than the standard isoform objective. Has a couple of elements in there, from a power detector through an aligner and optic, spectral sensors, some overfill sensors. So besides doing the jobs it should do minimally, it also allows you to tell you how big your microscopes are aligned. Just as a little unit up the side, together with the spectrometer, you can estimate your wavelengths pretty reasonably. That whole thing does this analysis right away online. It's EoE compatible, and so you get just the responsible file back from the cloud, and here we go. This is what we're assembling now for the next round of tests. But what it also is a very easy way of keeping track of your microscope performance. Right, this will tell you if your light source is not performing, if you don't get the same sort of out of light. This will tell you when your lasers don't misaligned, don't hit the center of your objective area. This will tell you if you don't get the same sort of light on your camera when you run the same sort of ramp that you did before. Because it does have these multiple sensors in there, it does self-calibrate quite well. And with that, I say thank you so much, and I want to acknowledge that this is not all my work. I can think of all these things, but I can't do them all. And so there's my lab where this certainly is a major project, but Max Huisman is the person who is the electronics guy that builds for MetaMax. Matthias is the person who worked with Katrina and me to really get this metadata down into a model. Katrina Stromino is a colleague at UMass who became a CCI imaging scientist and really took the work from making a long list of parameters into a data model that he worked with as a programmer, and Alex Magano, who lab is a programmer who makes a collection tool. Okay.
Thanks a lot, David. In the interest of time, I think we limit questions to one or two urgent issues to clarify, and then maybe have a general discussion also at the end of the image data working group update. Other questions for David?
When is it available?
That was easy to say.
Unfortunately, our IP people are in a little bit of a bind with Chroma is one of the companies that is really interested in making this available. Hopefully that doesn't take much longer. We've been putting substantial resources in the development. There's an estimate that it needs about a $200,000 investment on their side to make the production running. And so between patent costs and that, we'll try to figure it out right now.
Okay, then I suggest we move on. Thanks again very much, David, for coming all the way.